Colorado Territory, August 1874. The wind howled through the canyon like a warning, sharp and cold despite the summer sun. Poppy Vanridge pressed her back to the cliff wall, her boots skidding against loose shale as her fingers scrambled for grip. The narrow path beneath her gave a sudden crunch, then crumbled away entirely. Her scream tore through the canyon as she dropped. A strong hand caught her wrist. "Hold on," a deep voice shouted. She dangled over the edge, heart slamming in her chest, the sun blinding her as she looked up into the face of a man crouched above her, his dark brown hair ruffled by the wind, his jaw tight with focus. His hand was rough, calloused, locked around her wrist with unshakable strength. "I've got you," he said. She clung to his arm, her fingers slipping over his shirt sleeve. The cliff wall scraped her side. Her legs kicked empty air. Then, with a grunt, he leaned back on his heels and hauled her up inch by inch until she collapsed into him, gasping. Both of them landed hard against the dirt. She lay there, trembling, as dust floated around them. His chest rose and fell fast beneath her palms. "You all right?" he asked, still holding her arm. Poppy nodded, then coughed, breath catching. I think so." He let out a breath, nodded once, then helped her sit up. "Name's Kade Ellery," he said, offering his hand. Poppy Vanridge." They shook hands, his palm warm and steady. Her own felt like ice. "What were you doing up here?" he asked, glancing toward the broken path. "That trail's not safe. I was told the ridge leads around to Black Hollow," she said, brushing dirt off her skirt. "I was trying to get to my uncle's cabin. He passed last winter. I inherited the land." Kade's brow furrowed. "You came all the way up here alone?" "I can handle myself," she said quickly, then winced as she touched her scraped hip. He raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. "I left from Leadville 2 days ago," she added. "Had a map. Thought it was still accurate." "It is. Just not after that last rock slide." Poppy looked around. The trail behind her was nothing but rubble. The canyon dropped off sharply below. "Looks like you saved my life," she said softly, meeting his eyes. Kade's face broke into a quiet smile. "Looks that way." They sat there for a moment, the sun warm on their backs, wind tugging at their clothes. Poppy's hands were still trembling slightly, but she forced herself to breathe. "Where were you headed?" she asked. "Was checking the fence line on my land," he said, nodding toward the rise above. "My place sits just over that ridge. You're lucky I was passing through." "So am I," she said, her voice catching. He stood, then offered his hand. "Come on. I'll get you cleaned up. You can rest at my place and figure out your next steps." Poppy hesitated, then took his hand. His grip was firm, reassuring. As he helped her to her feet, she saw the way he looked at her, not with pity, but concern. Real concern, the kind that wrapped around her like a blanket. She limped as they walked, and Kade slowed his pace to match hers without saying a word. His horse waited farther up the trail, a big bay gelding with a calm eye. Kade offered to ride double, and though she hesitated, proper or not, her bruised hip made the choice for her. She let him lift her up behind the saddle, her arms going around his waist. His body was solid, warm. They rode in silence, the trail winding through pine and red rock. By the time they reached his homestead, the sun hung low in the sky, and the mountains behind them glowed orange. Kade's cabin was simple but well kept. A porch with a bench, a split rail fence around a grazing field, a small barn with chickens pecking in the dirt. He helped her down gently, his hands lingering at her waist a second longer than needed. Inside, the air smelled of pine wood and coffee. He stoked the fire, then brought her a damp cloth and a tin of salve. She sat at his kitchen table, skirt pulled up just enough for him to see the scrape on her thigh. "Sorry," she muttered, cheeks flushed. "You're hurt," he said plainly, kneeling beside her. His touch was careful, respectful. "I'm not going to let you limp around like that." She looked down at him, the firelight catching the serious line of his jaw. She could feel her heart thudding again, not from fear this time. "Thank you," she whispered. He glanced up. His eyes were dark, steady. "You're welcome." Poppy stayed the night in his spare room, too sore to travel. The bed was firm, the quilt hand-stitched. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind outside. Somewhere near midnight, she heard him moving in the next room. Quiet footsteps, the creak of the floorboards. In the morning, he made her coffee and eggs. She ate at his table, watching him move about the room like he belonged to it, and now, Somehow, she did too. "I'll take you to Black Hollow this afternoon," he said. "But if it's all the same to you, I'd feel better if you stayed one more day, just to be sure your leg's all right." She should have said no. She barely knew him. But instead, she said quietly, "I'd like that." Later, when he showed her the pasture and the creek that ran behind the barn, she found herself smiling more than she had in months. His dog, an old hound named Mudge, followed them around, tail wagging. Poppy leaned against the fence, watching the sun move across the fields. Kade stood beside her, arms folded, his face turned toward the mountains. "You live out here alone?" she asked. "Most days," he said. "Lost my brother in the war. Folks passed early. Just me now." She nodded. "I lost my parents when I was 17. My uncle was all I had left." Kade looked at her then, really looked. "That kind of loss stays with you." "Yes," she said, voice soft. "But it's not the only thing." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "No, it's not." She looked up at him, heart beating fast. "Kade," she said quietly, "when you pulled me up from that cliff, I thought I was going to die." "But you did not," he said simply. "No, because of you." His hand lingered near hers on the fence rail. She turned her palm so their fingers touched. "I do not usually trust people this quick," she said. "Me neither. But I feel like I can breathe here," she said. He smiled, slow and real. "Then stay a little longer." She nodded, and for the first time in a long time, she felt safe. The second morning brought a hush of fog that clung low to the earth, softening the outlines of the barn and the rise behind it. Kade stood at the stove, quiet in the way men are who have spent long years without anyone to speak to before breakfast. Poppy sat with her hands wrapped around a tin cup, watching the gray light shift across the table. Her hip ached less than it had last night, though a bruise bloomed beneath her skirt like a dark flower. "Fog like this usually burns off by mid-morning," Kade said, without looking over. "But you won't want to be riding out till then. Rocks'll stay slick till the sun dries them." Poppy nodded. "I'm in no hurry." She meant it. The thought of the empty cabin waiting at Black Hollow filled her with more unease than longing now. It had belonged to a man she'd barely known, her mother's estranged brother, and the idea of stepping into a life that had ended without her felt like trying to wear someone else's coat. Too loose in places, and too tight in others. Kade set a tin plate in front of her cornmeal mush with honey and a few late blueberries. He filled his own cup and sat across from her, elbows braced wide. "You figure on staying long at Black Hollow?" he asked, his voice mild. "I don't know yet," she said, stirring the mush with her spoon. "It's more land than I expected. He never wrote much. I only saw him once when I was a girl." "You planning to sell it?" She looked up. "Would you?" He considered that. "Depends. What's on it?" "Cabin, some cleared pasture, a shed that's seen better days. There's a spring, from what I was told." He nodded. "Water's good. Land with water usually holds its worth." Poppy tilted her head. "You sound like someone who's bought land before." "I did. This place, when I got back from the army. Took 2 years' wages and a whole mess of mending fence for other folks to scrape together enough." Her eyes rested on the scar that cut across the back of his wrist, pale against the sun-dark skin. "Was that from the war?" "No," he said. "That one's from a fence post that gave out in the wind." "Caught me wrong. The ones from the war are harder to see." She didn't press. There was a quiet to him that didn't invite pity. Instead, she asked, "Do you like it here? Living like this?" He glanced out the window. The fog was thinning, revealing the line of the trees beyond his pasture. "Some days I miss the noise. I was born in Pueblo, before it started growing so fast. But there's peace here. Work you can see the end of." She smiled faintly. "I never thought I'd want quiet. I used to dream of St. Louis. Dance halls, painted gloves, carriages. And now I think I want to be somewhere that doesn't disappear when I close my eyes." Kade leaned back, his gaze steady. "You won't find painted gloves here. I've noticed. But you will find good soil. A clear night sky. Neighbors who'll lend a hand when it counts." "Is that what you are then?" she asked, voice soft. "A neighbor?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for the piece of paper folded beside the stove, a map, she realized, scrawled with his own markings. He unfolded it and laid it between them. "This creek," he said, pointing, "runs down behind my south pasture. Your cabin sits up here, near the bend. It's not more than 2 hours by horse, if the weather holds." Poppy studied the lines. You've been up that way? Once. Years ago. Didn't know who owned it then. She traced the lines with her fingertip. It's strange, seeing it like this. Just ink and paper, but knowing it's all real, and waiting. It's yours, he said. That means you get to decide what to do with it. She looked up. And if I don't know how to start? His voice was quiet. Then you ask for help. They were still sitting there when the sun broke through the fog entirely, casting long beams across the table. Dust motes danced in the light. Outside, the wind stirred the grass, and Mudge barked once, then settled. Later, when they rode out together, Poppy felt the difference in the air. The trail had dried, and Kade's horse stepped carefully, as if it knew the way without needing to be told. She rode behind him again, the saddle creaking beneath her. Neither of them spoke much, but when she glanced at him, she saw a small line of tension near his eye, as though he was watching more than just the path. When they crested the ridge, the land opened up below them wide and green with patches of yellow grass and the dark line of trees marking the creek. The cabin was visible from here weathered, the roof slanted slightly, but still standing. There it is, Kate said. Poppy looked down at it, her chest tightening. It's smaller than I remembered. You were smaller, too. She laughed, the sound surprising both of them. They reached the cabin by mid-afternoon. Kate dismounted first, then helped her down. She stood in the yard, boots crunching on old gravel, and stared at the door. The windows were clouded with dust. The hinges creaked when he pushed it open. Inside, it smelled of cedar and thyme. A few pieces of furniture sat beneath white sheets, and on the mantel, a tin cup held a bundle of dried sage. Kate stepped back. I'll give you time. She caught his sleeve lightly. Will you stay while I look? He nodded. If that's what you want. They moved through the cabin slowly. Poppy opened a drawer and found a stack of yellowed letters, tied with twine. She didn't read them. Not yet. In the back room was a cot, a cracked mirror, and a shelf lined with empty jars. Outside, the sun began to lower. The shadows lengthened across the field. When she stepped back onto the porch, Kade was leaning against the post, arms crossed. I could make it work, she said. I believe you could, but I don't want to do it alone. He looked at her then, not surprised, not uncertain. Just waiting. I don't know what that means yet, she said, but I don't want to walk through this life with no one beside me. He unfolded his arms, came to stand in front of her. You don't have to, he said, and when she reached for his hand, he took it without hesitation. By the time the sun dropped behind the ridge, the air had cooled enough to draw a shiver up Poppy's arms. She stood just beyond the porch rail, ankle-deep in tawny grass, eyes following the curve of the creek winding through her land. Kate had tied the horses beneath a lean-to, and now moved through the field beside her, his gait easy, hands tucked into the back pockets of his trousers. You planning to sleep in the cabin tonight? He asked, watching a hawk circle above the distant treetops. I thought I might, she said. It's been sitting empty too long. Feels like it's waiting for someone to open the door and make it real again. Kate's gaze slid toward the roofline. Then I'll check the chimney before you light anything. Birds like to nest in him if they sit quiet too long. Poppy nodded and stepped closer to the porch. She reached beneath the overhang and pulled free a bundle of dried tobacco leaves hung there by her uncle, likely meant for trade or comfort. The twine had frayed, but the leaves still held their scent. I think he meant to come back, she said, her voice low. Kate didn't speak. Instead, he stepped up onto the porch and ducked into the cabin, re-emerging a moment later with a rusted tin lantern and a small pouch of flint. I'll stay till the fire's going steady, he said. Then I'll head back. Be easier coming down in the morning. She watched the way he moved, methodical and certain, not rushing but not lingering either. When he crouched by the hearth, she knelt beside him, careful not to let her skirt brush the soot. I've never lit a fire in a stone hearth before, she admitted. He glanced sideways. You will. They worked in silence, he stacking the kindling, she crumbling the dry moss he handed her. When the first flame caught, small and blue, she leaned back on her heels and exhaled. The warmth crept slowly into the room, casting flickering light on the bare walls. Kate stood and dusted his palms. Won't hold all night, but it'll take the edge off. She rose, brushing her hands against her apron. You'll ride back in the dark? I've done worse with less moon. She stepped closer, her hands settling on the edge of the table. Then let me pack you something. There's dried meat in the cupboard and half a loaf in my satchel. He hesitated. You don't need to do that. I know, she said, but I want to. He waited, eyes steady, before giving the smallest nod. She moved through the cabin, careful with each step, still learning the rhythm of the floorboards. When she returned with the bundle wrapped in muslin, she placed it in his hands. I don't know if it's much use to you, she said. It is, he replied. More than you know. Outside, the wind had quieted, the hush of night settling in. Kate stepped onto the porch, reins in hand. Poppy followed, stopping at the threshold. He turned back, the lantern light behind her casting her face in a soft orange glow. I'll come back tomorrow, he said. Check the roof, see if the spring's still flowing right. She folded her arms, not out of cold, but to still her hands. I'd like that. There was a pause, long enough for the moment to ask something more of them. He looked at her, really looked, and this time, she didn't look away. You're not the kind of woman who waits to be saved, he said. And you're not the kind of man who walks away after doing it. A long breath left his chest, and for a moment, the world narrowed to the space between them. Good night, Poppy. Good night, Kate. He mounted, turned his horse slowly, and rode down the slope without another word. She watched until even the sound of hooves faded, until it was just her and the wind and the soft crackle of firelight behind her. Inside, the cabin no longer felt like a stranger's place. It felt like the start of something that might be hers, not just the land or the walls, but the life being built inside them. She sat near the hearth, knees drawn up, lantern low beside her. The scent of smoke and old pine filled the room. And though the wind rose once more outside, she didn't feel alone. She was not waiting to be saved. She was waiting to begin. Poppy woke to the sound of the roof settling above her, which shifting in the dawn chill. The fire had burned low, reduced to a cradle of faint orange coals. She lay still for a moment beneath the quilt she'd found folded in the cedar chest at the foot of the cot, worn, but clean. The cabin smelled of smoke and dry earth. Outside, a jay called out sharp and high, and she felt the weight of the land settling into her bones. She dressed slowly, her hips stiff but no longer pulsing with pain. The mirror near the hearth caught her reflection as she pinned her hair back, a face she hadn't studied in days, thinner than she remembered, with a steadier gaze. She stepped out barefoot into the yard, the grass still cool with dew. Across the slope, a figure approached on horseback, his silhouette familiar in its quiet economy. Kade rode easy, one hand resting lightly on the horn, the other holding a bundle tied in oilcloth. I brought nails, he said as he dismounted, and a square of canvas. Roof's missing a few shingles. I wondered if you'd come back early, she said, stepping down from the porch. Wasn't sure if the morning would hold you. I said I'd come, he answered, lifting the bundle from the saddle. I don't say things I don't mean. She held the door for him as he carried the supplies inside. He set the bundle by the hearth, eyes flicking once to the low coals. You've got the beginnings of a fire, he said. Not bad for your first. She smiled. It stayed lit through the night. That's the trick. Doesn't need to roar. Just needs to keep. He glanced at her then, and she caught something unspoken in his eyes, a weighing, maybe, or a kind of quiet recognition. He broke their gaze first. I saw a deer sign near the creek, he said, rolling up his sleeves. Tracks fresh from last night. You'll want to keep the salt block raised, unless you mean to feed them. I don't have any salt block. I figured. I brought one. They worked through the morning, Kate on the roof, Poppy tending to the hearth and sweeping out the dust gathered in the corners. She found a sheaf of pressed flowers behind the mantel, black-eyed Susans, dry as paper. She left them where they were. By midday, he came down the ladder, covered in bits of bark and shingle dust. Won't leak now, he said, wiping his brow. You didn't have to fix all that today. He shrugged. Easier to do it while the sky's clear. She poured water from the pitcher into a tin cup and handed it to him. He drank, then rested a hand on the porch rail, his gaze drifting to the slope beyond. I used to think I'd head south someday, he said. War ended, and I figured maybe Texas. Warmer winters. New start. What changed your mind? I met a man who said roots only grow if you let the wind pass over them long enough. I didn't know what that meant until I stopped trying to outrun the quiet. Poppy sat on the edge of the steps, the sun warming her shoulders. My mother used to say the land remembers kindness. He nodded slowly. It remembers a lot of things. She looked up at him. And what do you think it'll remember about you? He paused, then sat beside her, his knees brushing hers. That I didn't leave it empty. They sat in silence, the kind that didn't press or pull, just filled the space with something steady. A hawk passed overhead, its shadow sweeping the field. I found something, she said at last. Letters. In the drawer beside the bed. He turned slightly. From your uncle? I think so. They're addressed to my mother, but none were ever sent. I haven't read them yet. You don't have to. I will. Just not today. He nodded. There's time. Later, after he walked the field and set the salt block near the creek, he returned with a bundle of wild onions and a few early chanterelles. She cleaned them while he chopped wood behind the shed, his axe ringing out in even rhythm. She cooked slowly, unsure of her hand at the stove, but the scent of onions crisping in the pan made the cabin feel less like a stranger's place and more like a beginning. They ate on the porch, plates balanced on their knees, the sky streaked with the first draw of dusk. He reached for a second helping without asking, and she felt something ease in her chest. When he stood to leave, the light had gone soft, the kind that made the corners of the world seem less sharp. I'll come by in 2 days, he said as he gathered his reins. She tilted her head. Not tomorrow. Fence needs mending back home. But I'll be here before the third sun. She stepped forward, hands clasped. I'd like that. He mounted, and for a moment, he didn't move, just sat there, looking down at her. You're not what I expected, he said. She smiled. Neither are you. He touched the brim of his hat, then turned his horse toward the ridge. She watched him until the trees took him from view, the hush returning once more. That night, she lay with the window cracked open, the sounds of the creek and the rustle of dry leaves wrapping around her like a quilt. There was nothing unfinished in the air, just the slow, patient rhythm of something beginning to grow. It was late afternoon when Kade returned, the sun stretching long shadows across the southern slope. His horse moved slow, unhurried, and he led a second behind him, an older mare with a flaxen mane and a patient gait. Poppy stood beside the cabin, a basket of laundry beneath her arm, and shaded her eyes as he approached. She's gentle, he said, patting the mare's shoulder. Won't give you trouble on steep ground. Poppy stepped closer, resting a hand on the mare's warm neck. She yours? She was my brother's. Had her since she was a colt. Figured he'd want her with someone steady. I've never had a horse of my own. You do now? Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. It's a kind thing, Kade. It's not kindness. It's right. The quiet between them held, but it wasn't empty. He didn't move to dismount. She didn't step back. The mare flicked her tail and shifted her weight, dust curling around her hooves. I read the letters, Poppy said softly. Kade's back straightened, but he didn't speak. He tried, she continued. My uncle. He wanted to make amends with my mother. Said he didn't know how to reach her after she married my father. Said he thought she'd hate him for things that happened before I was born. No one teaches us how to come back from silence, Kade said, voice low. I didn't know him, she said. But he left this place to me. That has to mean something. It means he believed you'd make good of it. She turned toward the cabin, the porch washed in pale golden light. A few hens clucked from beneath the steps, scratching at loose seeds. The air smelled faintly of juniper and warmed earth. I want to stay, she said. He nodded, slow and certain. You should. I don't just mean through winter. Kade dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. He led the mare toward the lean to but paused when she touched his sleeve. I never thought I'd want to root down, she said. But this land, it's honest. And you? She hesitated, then held his gaze. You've made it easier to breathe. His hand came up slowly, brushing a curl behind her ear. You've brought life to a place that was only holding on. I'm not afraid of the work, she said. I just want someone to work it with. I've got calloused hands and no one else to share supper with, he said. Seems to me the choice is already made. She stepped forward, resting her hand against his chest, just over his heartbeat. Then stay. Not just today. I'll stay as long as you'll let me. The last of the light slipped behind the ridge, shadows folding across the fields. Kade leaned down, his forehead touching hers, and she closed her eyes. There was no rush in it, no urgency, just the sure feeling of two people finding their place in each other. They spent the next weeks building not just repairs, but a rhythm. Cade moved his belongings from his place, first his tools, then his coats, then the carved box that held his brother's letters. Poppy cleared shelves in the back room and hung a small bunch of lavender in the window. They planted turnips and late cabbage, split wood for winter, and traded eggs for flour with a neighbor who passed through every fortnight. Their days were quiet, filled with movement and soil and the smell of bread rising. Nights were slower, the fire crackling low as they read aloud from the books her uncle had left behind. Cade's voice was rough and used to the words, but steady. She listened with her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, the world beyond the cabin fading to nothing. One morning in early October, he came in from the pasture with a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "There's a calf," he said, "born in the tall grass. Strong little thing. You didn't say the cow was expecting." "I didn't know. She was lean all summer." "Hit it well." They walked out together, boots leaving tracks in the brittle grass. The calf swayed on unsteady legs, its coat the color of wet clay. Poppy knelt beside it, her fingers gentle behind its ear. "It's a start," she said. Cade wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "It's a life." That evening, they sat on the porch, a blanket across their laps, her head tucked against his side. The stars came out one by one, and the moon rose slow and bright. "I used to think I had to choose between being safe and being loved," she said. "You don't," he answered. "Not here." She turned her face up to his. "Then let's make it ours. All of it." Cade didn't hesitate. "We already have." In the months that followed, the cabin filled with signs of permanence. A new shelf in the kitchen, a second quilt folded at the foot of the bed, a carved wooden ring, sanded smooth, worn on the third finger of her left hand. They married beneath the cottonwoods, just before the first snow. No preacher, just words spoken true, with the wind as witness and a few neighbors standing quiet around them. Cade's hand never left hers, not even when the snow began to fall. They lived the years plain and full. Harvests and lamb births, mended boots and shared laughter. Some days were hard drought, a sickness that took one of the hens, a broken axle that kept them home through spring, but none of it felt empty. Poppy never left the land. She didn't need to. The world she'd once chased had found her here, in a man who knew how to listen with his whole self, and in a home that had waited for someone like her to bring it back to life. And when the wind swept down from the ridge in the middle of winter, they sat close by the fire, her hand in his, the quiet between them filled with the kind of love that doesn't need to be spoken to be understood.